We'll be building this timer in React.js. We can enter 2 minutes 30 seconds to start a 2.5 minute timer, or we can enter 150 seconds to start 2.5 minute timer. So if the seconds are greater than 60, then they get converted into minutes. So we can pause, resume, and reset the timer as well. So these kind of questions are asked in interviews. So let's get started. First, we'll have our input fields. So input type number, input for minutes and input for seconds. We'll have our buttons, button start, button pause slash resume, and button reset. And finally, we'll have our clock. So div 00:00. We'll give a br tag as we are not using any CSS. Br, and now we'll make these two inputs as controlled input. So for that we need some state. So const input minutes, set input minutes. This would be useState. Initially it would be 0. So a similar state for seconds as well. So input seconds, set input seconds. And we also need on change function. So function handle change minutes, event will be the argument, and set input minute as e dot current target dot value, and a similar kind of function for seconds as well. So handle change seconds, set input seconds. Okay, so now we'll place the value and the on change prop. Handle change seconds. So now these inputs are controlled inputs. We need 3 more states: clock minutes, clock seconds, and another state to know if the clock is running. So I'll create these states by copying this and replacing input with clock. So CLOCK, set clock minutes, so CLOCK, and another state const is running, set is running. So this would be a boolean state. useState, initially it would be false. Now we'll have on-click functions for these 3 buttons. Function handle start click. I'll copy paste this and replace start with pause. Resume click, and here we'll have handle reset click. So handle reset click is pretty simple. We just need to set back all these states to initial state. So I'll do that quickly. And set is running back to false. And handle pause resume click is also pretty simple. We just set is running to the opposite of the previous state. So if it's true, then it becomes false. If it's false, then it becomes true. So this button works like a toggle, right? And now we'll place these 3 functions inside our buttons. Right now, if we change some values and click on start, nothing happens, but we want these values to get reflected in our timer. So we set those values. So when we click on start, set clock minutes to input minutes, and set clock seconds to input seconds. And if you click on start, nothing happens because we are not using it. We are not using a derived state. So we'll have a derived state called const clock. So this would be a template literal clock minutes colon clock seconds, and we'll use this derived state here so that it reflects. Yeah, if we notice that, so we don't want this because we have a 0. Like if we check the type of this, so log type of input minutes, so if we check the type, it would be a string. We don't want that. We'll convert this to number. So const minutes equals to number input minutes, and same for seconds, input seconds. Okay, so now we'll use this. Right now, if we click on this, we don't have a 0, but if we have a single digit, we want to have a 0. So we'll fix that at the end. So we have 2 conditions where we don't want the timer to start. those conditions are, if both of the input fields are 0, we don't want the timer to start. So if minutes equals to 0 and seconds equals to 0, then we don't want the timer to start. So return, reload, this will not run, right? And we have another case where if the values are -1, then we don't want the timer to start. So if mins less than 0 or seconds is less than 0, return. So right now, if we have a negative value, it will not get reflected. So we have added got clause, but we need to add some more logic. So let's say if we have 130, so 130 seconds gets added, but we don't want that. We want these seconds to get converted into minutes, and we want the remaining seconds in our seconds. So this would be like 2 minutes 10 seconds. We need to do that. We need to have a condition. So if seconds are greater than 60, then we will do something else. We'll do this. So right now, if I have 130, so it will not get reflected because this condition is getting true. So what do we want in that condition? It will be similar, but we want something else. So the minutes would be minutes plus seconds divided by 60, and seconds would be seconds modulus 60. So here we are just adding the remainder for the seconds, right? And here we are calculating how many minutes are there from these seconds, right? So if we click on this, we get some decimal value, but we don't want that, right? So we'll just remove the decimal value. So math dot floor. If we do that, click start, we don't get the decimal value. Get 2 minutes 10 seconds, right? And we also want to set is running as true. So we'll set is running to true. And we also want to reset these input fields, right? Because once we click on the timer starts, we want to reset the input. Set input minutes to 0, set input seconds to 0. So we have our dummy timer now. The timer doesn't start. Now we'll have our useEffect where we'll update the clock state every single second if the clock is running. So I'll explain as I write the code. useEffect receives two arguments. First one is function. Second one is the dependency array. So we'll add an early return. So if the clock is not running, then return. We'll add this to our dependency. So this effect will run only if this state is true. So here we'll have an interval inside which we'll update the clock state. Const interval equals to set interval. So this receives two arguments. First one is function. Second one is the interval time. So for every single second, this function will run. And inside this function, we'll set the clock seconds first. So this depends on previous clock seconds, previous clock second to. If previous clock seconds is greater than 0, then we return previous clock seconds minus 1. So why do we have this condition? Because we don't want our seconds to go negative, right? I'll add another condition and explain it. So if previous condition equals to 0 and clock minutes is greater than 0, then we return 59, or else we just return back 0, right? We'll add this to our dependency clock minutes. So when our second becomes 0, at that time, if we have some minutes remaining, then we set our seconds back to 59. That's the logic here. And now we need to set our minutes. So set clock minutes. So this also depends on previous clock minutes. So return previous clock minutes. So for most of the seconds, our clock minute doesn't change. Our clock minute changes only if the clock seconds is equal to 0. So return previous clock minutes minus 1. When our seconds become 0, at that time we reduce our minute. So I'll just add this to our dependency clock seconds. This should not be working because we are not cleaning up the interval. So let's just test like that. So it clearly doesn't work perfectly, right? So we'll add the cleanup function. So the function which is returned by our effect is called a cleanup function, where we can clean up our interval. So clear interval, and we pass the interval ID. So setInterval returns the interval's ID, and we use that ID to clean up that interval. So now if we test our timer, it should be working. So it works fine, but this still has an issue. So if you put 2 seconds and click start, so the minute goes to negative. We don't want that, right? To prevent that, we need to add another early return. So it would be like clock minutes equals to 0 and clock seconds equal to 0. This early return should fix it. So now if we have 2 seconds and click start, our minute doesn't become negative, right? So that's all for the timer. So when our timer is in single digits, we want 0 to be in front of it, right? So for that, we need to change our derived state. So here we will first convert this to string, and we'll check the length of the length. If the length is equals to 1, then we return something, or else we return clock minutes. So that something would be another template literal where we'll append 0 to clock minutes, right? And I'll just copy this and paste it here. So instead of clock minutes, I'll put seconds. So this should fix that issue, right? So now if we have our single digit, like we have a 0 appended. If not, then it works fine. So this should be working. So let's put 130 seconds, 2 minutes, 10 seconds. Yeah. So that's all for this video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more such videos.